皆さん、こんにちは。眠いロコです。Hello everyone, how are you doing? Today we are going to learn about short form. Short form is also called plain form, and like te form, short form is one of the conjugations for verbs, adjectives, and nouns. I've been looking forward to teaching you this short form.Learning it will really expand the range of expressions you can use in Japanese. Today, I'll explain how each one is conjugated and introduce one example of when we use the short form. Alright, let's get started. Let's begin with the short form of verbs. The present affirmative form is simple.It's the same as the dictionary form. For example, verbs like 食べる、読む、来る。Actually, we call it short form because it's shorter than this or must form. That's probably why, but if it's just me thinking that, sorry. Next,Let's take a look at the present negative form. It changes depending on the verb type, so we'll go through them individually. Root verbs are simple. You just replace the last ru with nai. For example, 寝る becomes 寝ない. So what about 教えるThat's right. 教えない Next is you verbs. Look at this table so I can explain how to conjugate it. Do you remember that each row is called あ段、い段、う段、え段 and お段 All verbs end with う段 hiragana.And to conjugate you verbs into present negative form, you replace last hiragana with the adan hiragana in the same column and add nai. For example, 読む ends with mu. So you replace mu with ma. In this case, it's 読まないDoes that make sense? Let's look at other examples. What about 行く? This ends with く So replace く with か行かない What about 取る? Yes, it becomes 取らないThere is one thing you need to be careful about. Verbs ending with う get わ not あ For example, 買う becomes 買わない not 買わない This is an exception. Then what about 会うThat's right. 会わない Okay, lastly, let's look at irregular verbs. する becomes しない 来る becomes 来ない That's it. So what about 運転する? Yes, it becomes運転しない You may have noticed that all present tense negative short forms end with ない So it's also known as ない form. You'll see this conjugation come up in some grammar patterns. Anyway, putting that aside, let's move on to the past affirmative form, which is also known as た form. you might be wondering, what's ta form? But if you've already learned te form, it's easy. Ta form uses the same rules as te form. The only difference is that te turns into ta and de turns into da. If you haven't learned te form, please check out this video. Let's look at some examples. 食べる、食べて、食べた、歌う、歌って、歌った、泳ぐ、泳いで、泳いだ、来る、来て、来た。You may have already guessed, but this ta form is also used in some grammar patterns. Let's finish verbs by looking at the past negative forms. The past negative form is also not difficult. No matter the verb type, all you do is replace nai of nai form with なかった。For example, 読まない becomes 読まなかった。買わない becomes 買わなかった。しない becomes しなかった。That's all for verbs. There were a lot of rules, so it was a bit confusing, wasn't it? Here is the conjugation table for verbs. If it helps, you can take a screenshot. We practice together later. Now let's move on to the short form of adjectives and nouns. First, let's look at e-adjectives. The short form of e-adjectives is simple. You just remove des from the des form. That's all there is to it, but since we are here, let's review the conjugation. The present affirmative form is the same as the dictionary form, just like verbs. Like 大きい、難しい。For the present negative form, you change the final i to くない right? For example, 小さい becomes 小さくない。For the past affirmative form, you change the final i to かった。新しい becomes 新しかった。And for the past negative form, you change the final i to くなかった。古い becomes 古くなかった。Here is the conjugation table for each adjective. How much did you remember? Next, let's move on to na adjectives. Actually, the present affirmative form of na adjectives isn't the same as the dictionary form. To make the present affirmative short form of na adjectives, you need to change the final na to da. For example, 簡単な becomes 簡単だ. For the present negative form, you change the final na to じゃない。有名な becomes 有名じゃない。For the past affirmative form, you change the final na to だった。きれいな becomes きれいだった。And for the past negative form, you change the final な to じゃなかった。便利な becomes 便利じゃなかった。That was a lot in one go. Doing okay? But actually, the short form of na adjectives is almost the same as this form. And finally, let's look at nouns. As I mentioned in a previous video, noun sentences follow a conjugation pattern similar to na adjective. Let's take a look at the conjugation table first. You can see that they are very similar. Now I'll go over the noun short forms all at once. 先生だ。先生じゃない。先生だった。先生じゃなかった。That's how all of these forms conjugate. I know it was a lot. Great job! Okay, to finish up, I'd like to introduce one situation where we use the short form. That is, we use the short form in casual conversations. This or must forms we've been using are polite and formal expressions. That's why beginners learn this must form first, but in real conversations with family or friends, people don't really use it. When speaking casually, we use the short form. What I want you to be careful about is this. Although the short form is used in casual conversations, it doesn't mean the short form is only for casual speech. This is something learners often misunderstand. Short form is just one conjugation pattern, and it's used in many different grammar patterns, including polite expressions. Okay, now let's look at some example sentences. 猫はかわいい。あの時は幸せだった。昨日新しい本を買った。In the present affirmative form of na adjectives and nouns, people often drop da. But when the sentence ends with ne or yo, you keep it. For example, コンビニは本当に便利。コンビニは本当に便利だね。私はトマトが好き。私はトマトが好きだよ。When you ask a question, you don't use は。You just say it with a rising intonation. Like, よく YouTube を見る? And what we've seen so far is still relatively polite even for casual speech. In real conversations, people often drop particles like は、が、お and に. So here is what a typical real conversation looks like. あの映画見た？うん、見た。元気？うん、元気。明日学校行く？行かない。パクチー好き？好きじゃない。 can be a bit difficult to distinguish between うん and うん。And just so you know, you can't drop で。So you have to say Amazon でウイスキー買った。新幹線で東京行った。Alright, let's finish with some practice. Try changing this des must form into the short form. Here is the answers. We covered a lot today, so it's okay if you don't understand everything yet. Let's keep practicing step by step. Well done today! You really worked hard right up to the end. The short form is super important, so let's make sure you master it. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I'll see you in the next video. 見てくれてありがとう。またねー。